All eyes will be on Canada as the G7 summit starts 1 week from today. Prime Minister Mark Carney will host world leaders in Kananaskis, Alberta. Carney released Canada's 3 priorities for the summit: protecting Canada's communities and the world, building energy security, including critical minerals, and accelerating the digital transition with AI, and finally, securing partnerships of the future to build infrastructure and open up markets. This G7 meeting come amidst, obviously, those increasing tariffs on steel and aluminum as the trade war intensifies. Canada did invite Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum to attend the summit as a guest, but so far she has not committed to coming. Arturo Sarukhán is the former Mexican ambassador to the United States. Nice to see you this morning. Appreciate your time.
Likewise, Rosemary.
Want to start with the latest U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum. The Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has vowed to bring in countermeasures, counter tariffs, if there's no deal. What do you make of how Mexico is responding to these tariffs and to this trade war?
Well, I think it's done so gingerly. The fact that, for example, in comparison with Canada, that Mexico has declined to take the case of both tariffs on steel and aluminum and also on auto parts and automobiles to the WTO in Geneva is a sign that I think she feels she needs to play a very safe and cool and collected game with Donald Trump. Yeah. But we'll see. Secretary of Economy Marcelo Ebrard was in Washington on Friday in conversations with Lutnick, Besson, and Greer. Depending on how that went, we will find out tomorrow whether President Sheinbaum decides to resort to Mexico's right to compensation, which is really what this is. More than retaliatory measures, I think that the issue that Mexico might end up announcing tomorrow is requesting compensation, which is what Mexico would have the right to in terms of this new hike of the tariffs to 50%.
Of course, everyone's sort of dealing with Donald Trump individually, but the difference here is, of course, that Canada, the U.S., and Mexico have a trade deal, a trilateral trade deal. And we learned this week that not only are discussions intensifying between Canada and the U.S., but the President and the Prime Minister are talking directly. Are you concerned that Mexico is not part of that conversation? Does that worry you in any way?
I'm very concerned. I've always believed that trilateralization, despite some voices in Canada that throughout the years, decades, have argued that trilateralization rests away from Canada's bilateral relationship with the United States. I think trilateralization has always been a boon for both Canadian and Mexican interests in a very complex relationship with our common neighbor, the United States. When Gary Dua, who was at the time the Canadian ambassador to the United States, and I were lobbying the U.S. government for having Canada and Mexico adhere to the TPP, now CPTPP, I would always joke that he and I had one thing in common. We both lived next to an elephant, but it was better to be on top of the elephant than underneath the elephant. So the fact that there are conversations going, that Mexico isn't part of those conversations, that we all know that Donald Trump's preference at the end of the day is likely going to be to strike a bilateral agreement with Canada, a bilateral agreement with Mexico, and get rid of the trilateral regional approach to trade, is setting off my alarms. That's another reason why I think President Sheinbaum should not think a moment in accepting Prime Minister Carney's invitation to join the G7 summit in Alberta in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So you think that she should attend, that there is an advantage there for her to be there? Yeah.
Absolutely. It would allow her to, first of all, reset relationships with Canada, leave aside the tit for tat, the pissing match that Canadians and Mexicans have been in since the fall, when some Canadian premiers sort of suggested that Canada should throw Mexico under the bus and ensure its bilateral free trade agreement with Canada. It would also solve an issue of the huge vacuum that Mexico created in Canada these past 6 years under López Obrador. López Obrador never met once bilaterally with Justin Trudeau, except in the context of North American Summit. And more importantly, it would allow Carney and Sheinbaum to have a first sit down with Donald Trump on neutral ground. And by neutral ground, I mean avoiding the potential of an ambush in the Oval Office with Donald Trump,
Yeah.
And to have a first discussion as to, okay, how do we move forward in what everything seems to suggest will be an early renegotiation instead of a mere revision of the USMCA, which could start as early as the fall of this year instead of June of 2026.
Well, let me just end on that. Do you think that renegotiation will take place? Obviously, we get very mixed signals from the president about it, but do you think that deal will hold up and that there will be a renegotiation?
I think there will be a renegotiation. What the outcome of that process is still up for grabs. I think if I had to put my money on it, and I'm not a betting man, but if I had to put my money on it, I think, there will certainly be a renegotiation, and that probably the outcome of that process is that we will end up with two separate free trade agreements, one between the United States and Canada,
Really?
one between Mexico and the United States.
Wow, and that would be, I would imagine you think that would be not a good thing for Mexico, yeah.
That's not a good outcome for future North American competitiveness.
Yeah.
If the U.S. wants to be successful in its recalibration of its relationship with Beijing, with China, particularly when it comes to trade and the economy, it needs Canada and Mexico for that recalibration to be successful in regards to essential supply chains, to energy, an energy paradigm for North America, et cetera, et cetera.
Arturo Sarukhán, thank you so much for making time for us. Appreciate it.
It's my great pleasure.